After all 8 lords began their operation, the infinite snake ancestors sensed the cultivator camp's 8 lords acting together and immediately became uneasy. Among the 8, Yuan, Starlight, Mo Man, and Luo Feng could completely conceal their life force fluctuations, while Wulin, Jin, Ming Huang, and Nai Jiyu could not. Since most ancestors in the endless primordial space could not hide their life force when acting collectively, the 8 lords' appearance immediately alerted all major factions. Luo Feng and Yuan deliberately did not conceal their life force in order to intimidate the entire endless primordial space. The weakest of the 8 lords ranked among the top 20 in combat strength, while the strongest stood in a league of his own. Together, they possessed enough power to suppress the 12 undying and immortal existences and 26 ancestors of the Ice Peak camp combined. Under Starlight's leadership, the 8 lords traveled for about a day before arriving at the Southern River territory. Yuan publicly declared that the cultivator camp was claiming the entire territory, which contained 1,600 world groups, and ordered all inhabitants to begin relocating within 1 day. Anyone who had not started relocating within 1 day would be killed without mercy. And anyone still inside the Southern River territory after 20 days would also be killed without mercy. The Southern River territory was shaped somewhat like a heart and was one of the most densely populated regions in the endless primordial space, second only to the cultivator's original territory. It was controlled by 29 ancestors who led countless innate primordial factions, along with more than 230,000 world-level primordial lives. These factions had long depended on the territory's abundant resources, including its source worlds, for survival. Yuan's announcement shocked them, and they immediately reported the matter to the 9 emperors while beginning the difficult process of relocation. Many clans had to abandon long-developed mines and gather their scattered members as quickly as possible. World-level primordial lives could travel independently to reunite with their clans, but high-level primordial lives were too slow to reach their clans in time. As the 8 lords waited in the void, the 9 emperor avatars of the innate primordial camp descended and confronted them. The infinite snake ancestor angrily accused the cultivator camp of attempting to seize territory belonging to the innate primordial camp. Yuan replied that the innate primordial camp had previously invaded the cultivator territory, slaughtered countless beings, and devoured source worlds, so the cultivator camp had every right to occupy their territory. The giant god emperor argued that the Southern River territory contained 1,600 world groups and that the cultivator lords did not need so many resources. The infinite ancestor claimed that the innate primordial camp had more than 100 ancestors while the cultivator camp had only 8 lords, suggesting that the cultivators should be satisfied with 3,600 world groups. Wulin and Nai Jiyu rejected this argument, while the silent extinction ancestor warned that the matter might ultimately lead to war. Luo Feng declared that the Southern River territory was only the beginning and that, considering the strength and potential of the cultivator camp, even controlling 20% of the endless primordial space would be too little. The 9 emperors were shocked and enraged by this declaration. Starlight then casually annihilated their avatars, making it clear that the cultivator camp was no longer willing to waste time on empty arguments. Yuan stated that a battle was inevitable. According to the cultivator camp's original plan, they intended to directly control 20% of the territory while commanding all the source worlds in the remaining territory. Their negotiations involved not only the innate primordial camp but also the Ice Peak camp and numerous smaller factions. Because the cultivators intended to control all source worlds within the territories of every major power, Starlight emphasized that the cultivator camp had to display overwhelming strength in order to advance this plan. Wulin eagerly welcomed the coming battle, while Jin stated that the cultivator camp had been oppressed for too long. The narration also explained the differences between Jin's primordial destruction path and Luo Feng's primordial blade path. Luo Feng's primordial blade path consisted of destruction occupying 87% and life occupying 13%. With the mysteries of life including life chi mechanism, life cutting, life entanglement, and other aspects, while the destructive mysteries focused mainly on pursuing overwhelming power. Jin's primordial destruction path was fundamentally different in both its destruction and life aspects, naturally forming a different Dao. Even when pursuing similar paths, different lords ultimately comprehended different Daos. Starlight anticipated that the innate primordial camp would also recognize the threat posed by the cultivator lords and would therefore prioritize survival in its battle formations while complementing its offensive power with defensive abilities. Ancestors skilled in life, defense, domains, immortality, worlds, and other powers could form a defensive system that would greatly increase the survival ability of their collective battle formations. Mo Man recalled that the innate primordial camp had previously relied on its overwhelming numerical superiority and had ignored defensive formations, focusing almost entirely on aggressive offense. This had forced the cultivator camp to defend with all its strength while suffering repeated defeats and losing world groups one after another. Fortunately, the lords were undying and immortal, allowing them to recover quickly and gather again even after a world group was lost. Jin noted that even when the innate primordial camp neglected defensive formations, killing an ancestor had still been extremely difficult. Yuan replied that the situation was now different. The lords then looked toward Luo Feng, with Ming Huang saying that the coming battle would depend on him. During their previous sparring, they had witnessed the terrifying power of Luo Feng's blade, which could cut all things and could not be resisted. Starlight stated that Luo Feng's power had surpassed the limits and that no one could predict his future, meaning he would provide the innate primordial camp with unexpected surprises. Luo Feng understood that the battle was not only intended to shock the innate primordial camp but also to intimidate every other faction in the endless primordial space. So he planned to cooperate fully with the battle formation and unleash his greatest power. Meanwhile, the inhabitants of the Southern River Territory desperately attempted to evacuate. One world-level primordial life had gathered approximately 70% of its high-level primordial clan and was rushing to rendezvous with the ancestors, fearing that if it failed to leave in time, Luo Feng might kill it from afar with a single blade. It tore open a space-time channel and hurried toward the gathering point. Clans near the border still had relatively more time, but those in the core region were in extreme panic because they had to travel, gather their clans, and take away as many resources as possible before the deadline. Many world-level primordial lives were unwilling to retreat and questioned why the innate primordial camp could not resist the cultivator camp. The ancestors reassured them that the 9 emperors would lead many ancestors into battle, while the other clans would temporarily retreat and return after victory. The innate primordial camp then began assembling its forces. The 9 emperors participated personally, and many ancestors sent their true bodies. A total of 89 ancestors gathered to form the most perfect battle formation combination they had previously tested. Simply assembling their true bodies took more than 10 days. The ancestors appeared in many forms, including beasts, celestial bodies such as stars and clouds, flowing water, mountains, and humanoid figures. The infinite snake ancestor angrily condemned the cultivator camp for invading their territory, recalling that the innate primordial camp had always oppressed the cultivators in the past. Now, however, the situation had reversed. The 8 cultivator lords had occupied their territory and even intended to seize a tenth of the endless primordial space in one move. Although the Southern River Territory contained only 1,600 world groups, its overall value was considered comparable to the cultivators' original territory because of its abundant resources. The innate primordial camp's resistance faction could not tolerate such a vast territory being claimed so easily, especially after Luo Feng declared that it was merely the beginning. The giant god emperor and inference fire ancestor both emphasized that this battle would demonstrate the might of the innate primordial camp and prove to all factions that it remained the strongest force in the endless primordial space. The infinite snake ancestor, infinite ancestor, silent extinction ancestor, inference fire ancestor, initial, mother of spacetime, giant god emperor, black tide ancestor, primordial beast ancestor, and other leaders commanded the selected 80 ancestors to form a colossal battle array. Under the leadership of Mother of Spacetime, the enormous formation began advancing toward the 8 cultivator lords. At the same time, forces from various factions throughout the endless primordial space watched the confrontation from afar. The 8 lords had been waiting for this moment, because this battle was also a crucial display of force in their plan to establish the cultivator camp's dominance. In the endless primordial space, all ancestors and lords watched the imminent great battle, which would determine the future power structure of the entire endless primordial space. The 89 ancestors of the innate primordial camp represented the largest faction and had previously occupied half of the territory. However, the cultivator camp, consisting of only 8 lords, had already occupied the 1,600 world groups of the Southern River Territory and intended to continue expanding, forcing the innate primordial camp to fight for its common interests. When the battle began, the infinite snake ancestor and the mother of spacetime immediately attacked the 8 lords of the cultivator camp. Their manipulation of spacetime clashed with the Starlight Lord's control, while Yuan's formation supported the cultivator camp and gave the Starlight Lord an even greater advantage in manipulating spacetime than before. The innate primordial camp was surprised by the increased influence of Yuan's formation. All the ancestors then launched their attacks. Among them, 5 possessed the highest level power of the life lineage, with their blood-colored, cyan, and green life forces spreading throughout the battlefield and influencing every ancestor. 39 ancestors who specialized in life-saving methods coordinated their various defensive powers, undying forces, world powers, domains, and other techniques into a highly effective cooperative defense. They prioritized survival above victory because they now regarded the cultivator camp as a genuine threat. Although each life-saving method was only a weakened form of the primordial level Tao, the combined power of 39 such methods was extremely formidable. The ancestors abandoned dangerous close combat tactics and instead relied on numerous coordinated killing techniques. Illusions infiltrated the spiritual wills of the 8 lords, but their exceptional spiritual wills allowed them to distinguish the illusions, although the mixture of real and false scenes still caused some interference. With Yuan's formation and the Starlight Lord's spacetime control, many ancestors were trapped within powerful timeline techniques. Their future selves resonated with their present selves, affecting their strength. The Mother of Spacetime was forced to suppress the interference caused by the Starlight Lord's timeline manipulation. The innate primordial camp launched a full-scale assault while maintaining their defensive formations. Their attacks included invisible poisons capable of penetrating barriers and entering the bodies and souls of the lords. Destructive powers resembling the end of the world. Forces that silently erased matter. Powers that caused the bodies of the lords to decay. Omnipresent attacks that repeatedly exploded within the cultivator camp's battle array. Causal attacks. Ensouled targeting techniques. Extremely terrifying destructive attacks occasionally pierced through Yuan's formation, although Wulin and Luo Feng tried their best to block them. Some destructive power still bypassed them and struck the other lords. However, the situation was now completely different from the past. Yuan and Luo Feng had become significantly stronger, while Yuan's formation could command the power of all 8 lords and reduce the attacks reaching them. The Starlight Lord's improved space-time manipulation further weakened the enemy's attacks, and Luo Feng continuously treated injuries and replenished their energy. Yuan and the Starlight Lord constantly burned their main battle avatars, consuming roughly 10% of their energy reserves with every breath, but their consumption was quickly restored. As a result, Moman, Nai Ji Yu, Jin, and Ming Huang no longer felt threatened by their injuries. The attacks of the innate primordial camp could no longer threaten the cultivator camp. After blocking the enemy's attacks, the 8 lords launched their counterattack using one of the 8 killing formations they had previously tested, the time-killing array. Lord Mo Man's waves spread silently throughout the battlefield, allowing the formation to monitor everyone. Luo Feng then drew his blade, producing an extremely concentrated blade light resembling a thin thread. The blade light perfectly merged with the powers of time and space and resonated with the waves. Under the rules of the primordial void, it could freely move through the past, present, and future timelines, bypassing many defensive techniques. The ancestors found the blade light impossible to clearly perceive or block. The Mother of Spacetime explained that although the blade light could flow through different timelines, it ultimately had to return to the present timeline to kill an enemy. And the blade light carried relatively little power while moving across different timelines. When it returned to the present, it slashed through an ancestor's body and split it in two. But the ancestor immediately recovered to peak condition through the omnipresent life forces. The time-killing array then repeatedly swept through the ancestors, passing through every one of them within only a few moments. Although the blade light itself did not cause significant damage, the time-killing array successfully gathered information about all 89 ancestors and identified their characteristics. Starlight immediately used this information to formulate a battle plan. The 8 lords had initially used the time-killing array mainly to test and gather information. But the ancestors were still alarmed because even their heavily protected bodies could be easily split apart. The battle then became much more intense. The powers of the 8 lords and the battle arrays of the ancestors collided violently, producing terrifying impacts. Observing from afar, the Ice Peak ancestor realized that the cultivator camp's strength had surpassed that of the Ice Peak camp and began wondering whether the territory currently occupied by the Ice Peak camp could still be defended. Other ancestors also recognized that even 89 ancestors working together were only comparable to the 8 lords of the cultivator camp. At a critical moment, Luo Feng burned his main battle avatar, and the Bloodshadow knife in his hand became even more powerful after being enhanced by the power of the Destruction World. All the lords except Wulin burned their main battle avatars, and through the formation, their combined power was concentrated into Luo Feng's Bloodshadow knife. The knife possessed unimaginable might and the ability to cleave through all matter and energy. The combined attack of the 8 lords broke through the defensive formation of the 89 ancestors. Even the coordinated defensive powers of dozens of highest-level forces were severed by the blade. The attack instantly reached the Dark Rock ancestor, who had been identified through the time-killing array as the easiest target to kill. When Luo Feng's blade struck, waves, destruction, thunder, life-cutting power, and various other forces erupted simultaneously within the Dark Rock ancestor's body. Despite the numerous life-saving powers deployed by the formations of the 89 ancestors, the attack instantly destroyed the Dark Rock ancestor's hidden life core. His body was then pulled away by the power of time and space. The Dark Rock ancestor fell in battle, reducing the innate primordial camp from 89 ancestors to 88. The ancestors were stunned, while the other factions watching the battle were shocked that an ancestor had been killed despite the innate primordial camp's extreme caution and powerful defensive preparations. Among the 89 ancestors of the innate primordial camp, 39 specialized in survival, while the remaining 50 focused on killing techniques and relied mainly on their companions for protection. The 8 lords of the cultivator camp first targeted the easiest ancestor to kill, instantly eliminating the Dark Rock ancestor. This caused unrest within the innate primordial camp, as some ancestors began to fear that their defensive formations were insufficient. Realizing that the situation could not continue, the infinite snake ancestor ordered the immediate use of their strongest killing move. Despite the original plan to study the 8 lords for hundreds or thousands of eras before acting, the infinite snake ancestor transformed into a massive ethereal phantom that enveloped the ancestors and 8 lords. Then suddenly solidified and wrapped around Yuan, trapping him inside its body. The infinite snake ancestor and the infinite ancestor then jointly executed Endless Light, Endless Might. After reaching the undying and undying level, the infinite ancestor had comprehended a burst technique similar to Luo Feng's origin Great Destruction. His dazzling light appeared directly inside the infinite snake ancestor beside Yuan, tearing apart and annihilating Yuan's main battle avatar despite the formation's protection. The innate primordial camp considered Yuan the most important target because the cultivator camp's coordination would be severely weakened without him, followed by Luo Feng and Starlight. However, Luo Feng's defense and combat strength made him extremely difficult to kill. While Starlight had no obvious weakness that could be exploited, Yuan was therefore the easiest target. Although his main battle avatar was destroyed, a weak avatar strand appeared beside Luo Feng and rapidly recovered under Luo Feng's power supply. It quickly reached 30 to 40% of its reserve energy and continued maintaining the formation. With the assistance of Wulin, Luo Feng, and Starlight, the weakened battle array stabilized, allowing Yuan's avatar to rapidly recover to sufficient strength. The innate primordial camp was shocked by his recovery speed. Once Yuan returned to his peak, the 8 lords launched their second strike. Luo Feng's blade easily cut through the battle array formed by the many ancestors. The initial ancestor attempted to block the blade, but his massive spherical body moved too slowly. The blade instead struck the wind-devouring ancestor, who dispersed his power into millions of winds, believing that one surviving gust would be enough to escape. However, invisible fluctuations destroyed 99% of his power, while thunder, annihilation, spacetime, life-cutting, and other forces annihilated all the remaining winds. The wind-devouring ancestor was completely killed. The third strike failed because the targeted ancestor possessed stronger life resilience than expected and received support from 5 highest-level life powers. The fourth strike succeeded. While the fifth failed, the 8 lords launched 8 strikes in succession, cutting through the layered defensive formations despite their weakening power. In the end, 3 ancestors perished. The innate primordial camp realized that they had greatly underestimated Luo Feng's blade. Even 39 ancestors specializing in life preservation could not completely withstand it. The mother of space-time had believed that their defensive cooperation would resist the Lord's killing techniques. But Luo Feng's blade proved to be unique. The silent extinction ancestor sensed that the blade seemed to embody the abyss of destruction and carried a terrifying threat of death. Even the initial ancestor sensed a trace of danger from it. The ancestors understood that Luo Feng's blade could break through formation obstructions and directly strike their bodies, meaning more ancestors might die if the battle continued. The mother of spacetime also saw no hope of breaking the Lord's battle array. Since even if one Lord were severely injured, Luo Feng could rapidly restore his companion's avatar to its peak. The remaining 86 ancestors therefore retreated and restrained their power, while the 8 lords also temporarily stopped attacking. Both sides ceased hostilities. The various factions observing the battle concluded that the cultivator camp had gained the upper hand in the opening clash. Although the 3 dead ancestors had relatively weak survival abilities and the innate primordial camp still possessed more than 30 ancestors who had not participated, the initial confrontation had clearly favored the cultivator camp. During the negotiations, the infinite snake ancestor questioned why the cultivator camp was not satisfied with occupying the southern river territory and still wanted to expand. Yuan explained that the cultivator camp controlled only 2/10 of the endless primordial space, while the innate primordial camp still controlled 4/10. The giant god emperor argued that the innate primordial camp had more than 100 ancestors and countless world-level and high-level primordial life forms, while the cultivator camp had only 8 lords and far fewer powerful life forms. He offered to let the cultivator camp keep the southern river territory if they promised never to expand into the territory of the innate primordial camp again. Yuan rejected this condition, pointing out that the cultivator camp might eventually produce a 9th lord, a 10th lord, or even more. Since the southern river territory already belonged to them, they would not accept being forced to promise permanent non-expansion. When the infinite snake ancestor asked what the cultivator camp truly wanted, Yuan stated that although they did not require excessive resources, all creatures of the source worlds were their kin. Therefore, they had one demand. All source worlds within the territory of the innate primordial camp must forever come under the command of the cultivator camp. In exchange, the cultivator camp would promise never to invade the territory of the innate primordial camp. Luo Feng, Starlight, Wulin, Ming Huang, Jin, Nai Ji Yu, Moman, and the other lords agreed with this decision. The 9 emperors and the many ancestors were stunned by the demand, and the infinite snake ancestor angrily condemned the cultivator camp's arrogance. The infinite great snake clan considered the source world origin the resource most suitable for its development. So the infinite snake ancestor firmly rejected the cultivator camp's demand that all source worlds within its territory be handed over. Yuan declared that all source world creatures were their kin and that the cultivator camp would eventually reclaim them, refusing to let them remain food for the infinite great snake clan forever. The infinite snake ancestor warned that demanding all source worlds would lead to a full-scale war, which could also engulf many source worlds within the cultivator territory. The 8 lords and the ancestors showed no fear of war. Yuan stated that the lords were undying and undying, so the battle would determine how many ancestors of the innate primordial camp would fall. The silent extinction ancestor even welcomed a brutal war, believing that blood and fire would help the life core grow and produce more undying and undying beings. Luo Feng declared that the innate primordial camp had been the strongest camp in the endless primordial space for too long and that it was time for its position to change. Since he possessed the power to control the destruction world and could perform periodic cleanups to gain the favor of the abyss of destruction, Luo Feng was prepared for a great massacre if negotiations failed. The potential war would involve 8 undying and undying lords on one side and 5 undying and undying ancestors, along with more than 100 ancestors of varying strengths. On the other, the casualties would inevitably be severe. However, The giant god emperor suddenly asked whether the cultivator camp only wanted the source worlds. Yuan confirmed that the 8 lords did not care about resources needed for life core evolution and only wanted the source worlds. All other resources in their vast territory could remain with the innate primordial camp. While both sides would continue to compete fairly for mysterious lands, the giant god emperor then asked whether the 8 lords would promise never to expand into the innate primordial camp's territory again. Yuan stated that all 8 lords would publicly promise never to expand. The giant god emperor believed that, in exchange for surrendering all source worlds, such a promise was acceptable because the giant god race did not care much about the source world origin. It also argued that the infinite Great Snake clan had relied too heavily on the source worlds for too long and that abandoning them could serve as another form of tempering. The infinite snake ancestor firmly refused. The infinite Great Snake clan had a much higher proportion of world-level beings becoming ancestors because of absorbing source world origin. If it abandoned the source worlds, the clan's future ability to produce ancestors would rapidly decline. However, the giant god emperor pointed out that many of the 86 ancestors present did not particularly need the source world origin. These ancestors became tempted by the cultivator camp's offer because the 8 lords had publicly promised never to expand again. Since the cultivator lords also lacked life cores, the promise appeared highly credible. The initial ancestor also stated that the infinite Great Snake clan's long-term dependence on source world origin might itself be a weakness, and that breaking away from it could become a form of tempering for life core evolution. The infinite snake ancestor realized that the innate primordial camp was internally divided. Among the 9 emperors, the giant god emperor, primordial beast ancestor, and black tide ancestor stood together. The initial ancestor and mother of spacetime were relatively neutral, while the infinite ancestor, who had become undying and no longer possessed a clan, no longer cooperated as closely as before. Many ancestors began arguing that they had no reason to risk their lives over source worlds if they did not need the source world origin, especially when the cultivator camp had promised not to expand. The 9 emperors and the other ancestors became divided into different factions. Since most ancestors who joined the war could potentially die, they were unwilling to fight for resources that were not essential to them. Seeing the internal disagreement, the infinite ancestor told the 8 lords that the innate primordial camp needed one era to conduct a thorough internal discussion and consult ancestors who were not involved in the battle before giving a final answer. Yuan agreed to wait. Led by the mother of spacetime, the ancestors then departed through a spacetime channel. During the journey, the infinite snake ancestor urged the giant god emperor to unite against the cultivator camp. The giant god emperor replied that the giant god race would not participate as long as the cultivator camp kept its promise not to expand. It added that nearly half of the ancestors did not need the source world origin and were unwilling to risk their lives. The giant god emperor advised the infinite snake ancestor to find a solution during the remaining one era, warning that if no solution could be found, its faction and many other ancestors would accept the cultivator camp's conditions. The infinite snake ancestor felt frustrated because the cultivator camp's promise never to expand had greatly reduced opposition to its demands. In the Southern River Territory, Yuan stated that the confrontation had already achieved its objective. The cultivator camp had demonstrated its strength to the entire endless primordial space, and 3 ancestors of the innate primordial camp had already died before them. He believed that continuing to rely on war to seize all source worlds was a poor strategy, since more than 20 undying beings could still return even if some source worlds were forcibly occupied. Negotiation was therefore the better solution. Yuan entrusted the negotiations to Starlight. Starlight proposed that Yuan and Luo Feng send avatars with him to visit the major forces. For weaker forces, the 3 could send weak avatars directly into their territories to meet their ancestors. However, negotiating with the Ice Peak camp would require the 8 lords' main avatars because the Ice Peak camp's 12 undying leaders were not afraid of war and could continue fighting even after suffering losses. Starlight acknowledged that permanently commanding all source worlds while facing numerous undying beings throughout the endless primordial space would be extremely difficult, even with his ability to traverse countless future timelines. Mogus, who possessed a mortal enmity with the cultivator camp, was particularly impossible to resolve because he was undying, acted alone, and enjoyed devouring countless souls of creatures. Yuan therefore emphasized that every force that could be brought over through negotiation would mean one fewer opponent and fewer troubles in the future. The main avatars of the 8 lords then set out together toward the Ice Peak Camp's territory. While the weak avatars of Luo Feng, Yuan, and Starlight descended into the territories of various weaker forces to visit their ancestors and begin a series of negotiations. The avatars of Starlight, Yuan, and Luo Feng crossed layers of time and space to visit Cafu. Starlight explained that most weaker forces were easy to negotiate with because the cultivator camp now occupied 3 of the 4 strongest positions in the endless primordial space, with Luo Feng being the strongest. Among the weaker forces, the main undying and undying existences requiring attention were the Hermit, Mogus, Demon Ruins, Cafu, and Feather Emperor. The Hermit was elusive and had no territory, while Mogus was a mortal enemy hidden among countless life souls and also possessed no territory. Therefore, they mainly needed to negotiate with Cafu, Demon Ruins, and Feather Emperor. Luo Feng believed Feather Emperor was concerned about the Feather Realm clan, which was not very interested in Source World origin, making negotiations relatively easy. Cafu and Demon Ruins were more difficult because they traveled alone without any ties. Cafu's cave mansion was located within a dazzling cloud cluster, with the surrounding 39 world groups forming his territory. The countless innate primordial lives living there relied on him for protection and remained completely loyal. After Luo Feng explained that the Source World creatures were kin to the Cultivator Lords and that the Source Worlds had to be reclaimed, Cafu agreed to help. He immediately ordered all world-level primordial lives under his command to stop consuming Source Worlds, declaring that anyone who disobeyed would die. Luo Feng thanked Cafu and promised to help him in the future, especially with information about the Abyss of Destruction. Demon Ruins also agreed, asking only that Luo Feng accompany him through the 34 layers of the Abyss of Destruction to broaden his horizons. Demon Ruins had always felt a connection with the Abyss of Destruction but had made little progress and never gained its recognition. Luo Feng agreed. Feather Emperor likewise agreed, requesting that the Cultivator Camp assist the Feather Realm clan if it faced a crisis in the future. Yuan promised that all 8 lords would help, satisfying Feather Emperor. After reaching agreements with these 3 undying and undying existences, the other ancestors among the weaker forces were much easier to persuade. Within one day, all weaker forces with territories had been convinced, while the Hermit and Mogus were excluded because they possessed no territory. The avatars of the Cultivator Camp's 8 lords then rushed to the core of the Ice Peak Camp. Yuan announced that the first phase of negotiations had succeeded, largely because of Luo Feng's influence. The weaker forces together controlled 2/10 of the territory, and all source worlds within it would now belong to the Cultivator Camp. The innate Primordial Camp and Ice Peak Camp were the most difficult opponents. The former had more than 100 ancestors with different interests, while the latter had 12 undying and undying entities. Yuan decided to negotiate privately with them. The 5 strongest were Sha Zhou, the Ice Peak Ancestor, the Pu Cheng Ancestor, the Wugu Ancestor, and Shu Saiwei. The Cultivator Camp and Ice Peak Camp had once been close allies, and Yuan still maintained deep friendships with many of its ancestors. He sent avatars to visit 9 of them, excluding the 3 emperors of Wind and Thunder Sea because of their poor relationship with him. Shu Saiwei immediately agreed to help Yuan, stating that Yuan had helped him the most in becoming undying and undying. Yuan was deeply moved and promised to remember his friendship. Shu Saiwei valued Yuan's loyalty, considering it rare among undying and undying existences. Yuan then negotiated with the Pu Cheng Ancestor, offering a list of resources. Pu Cheng agreed on the condition that Luo Feng help him explore a mysterious land once. Yuan confirmed that Luo Feng had already agreed, and the deal was concluded. The resources were highly valuable to the Pu Cheng clan and, in Pu Cheng ancestors' view, sufficient compensation for giving up the benefits of the source worlds. Of the 9 ancestors Yuan visited, 4 reached agreements with him. However, the Ice Peak Ancestor and Sha Zhou made additional demands. Sha Zhou demanded a destruction fruit, claiming that Ice Peak Ancestor and the others would otherwise refuse to hand over their source worlds. Starlight rejected this proposal, explaining that in the future he had foreseen Sha Zhou would not keep his promise. After obtaining the destruction fruit, the Ice Peak Ancestor would deliberately fall out with Sha Zhou and join forces with the Infinite Snake Ancestor. while Sha Zhou would use the situation to demand a second destruction fruit. Yuan knew that Sha Zhou was solitary and selfish, caring only about the Ice Peak ancestor and potentially even attacking the cultivator camp. Starlight still considered Yuan's negotiations highly successful because 4 of the 9 ancestors had agreed, dividing the Ice Peak camp and limiting its ability to oppose them. He believed the innate primordial camp would also only be able to offer limited resistance. However, Starlight stated that the cultivator camp would ultimately have to rely on slaughter. Those who had not reached the undying and undying realm and dared to interfere would have to be killed whenever possible. Once the opposing forces were weakened, even the infinite snake ancestor and Ice Peak ancestor would have to endure the situation. Suddenly, the Ice Peak camp sent a thought through time and space, saying that the 8 lords did not need to come personally. They already knew the cultivator camp's intentions but needed one era to discuss the matter internally before giving a response. Yuan agreed to wait. Nai Jiyu noticed that the Ice Peak camp, like the innate primordial camp, was also requesting one era. Starlight agreed to wait for now but warned that during this period they had to remain alert in case the opposing forces joined forces.